I was being so stupid. Remember that derailed train scene I set up here? I was so damn proud showing it off to everyone. And I had the train coming from this direction, hitting a turn and then flying off the tracks because it was going too fast. I thought I nailed it. Then someone left a comment pointing out that a derailed train should actually shoot straight off the track, not twist around a curve. I immediately saw they were absolutely right, and what a ridiculous mistake I'd made. The train should have gone straight, simple as that. How stupid do I have to be to make a derailed train take a turn like this? But let's be real, I bet most of you only just noticed this too, so maybe I don't need to feel that embarrassed after all. Plus, there's actually a way to fix this. Just add another train coming from the opposite direction and have them crash into each other. And just like that, no more turning problems. When trains hit, it doesn't matter where they go anymore. And we're gonna fix this once and for all. But before adding another train, we need to lock down the specific location for this crash scene. If you ask me, there's no better choice than a train yard. I mean, first, I love trains. Second, I love those trains parked together. Third, I'm guessing you all love trains and love to see those trains parked together too. So let's go with a train yard. And wouldn't you know it, those two trains managed to smash right at the entrance tracks. Picture it like two cars smashing into each other right at the parking lot entrance, shutting down the whole yard. That's the vibe I'm going for. You might not really know why train yards even exist in the first place, or why trains need to park together and what are they even doing there. For most people, a train yard, or we could call it a rail yard, is basically just seen as a parking lot for trains. It is where you find all these parallel tracks and rows of trains coming and going. So far, this track measures about 20 car lengths, but we still need it to be longer. I mean, the game has some pre-made train yard buildings. We will use them later as well, but honestly they're way too small and out of scale for what we're going for. We're aiming to build something relatively realistic, not necessarily a perfect recreation of a particular yard, but still, something that feels big and impressive. A typical freight yard usually has anywhere from 5 to 20 parallel tracks, depending on their size and purpose. Even small yards can run 1 kilometer long, while the larger ones can extend beyond 10 kilometers. I mean, one typical freight car is about 15 meters long, so in a 10-kilometer stretch, you could fit approximately 666 freight cars end to end. And apparently, there's no way I can build a yard that huge. I'd probably collapse halfway through. We'll aim to keep the length around 50 cars, which is already quite a lot. And for the tracks, let's say we make it about 15 to 20. Definitely not more than 20. We can then divide it into separate areas for freight and passenger cars. So after the track layout, we need to remove those pole-like structures from the electrified railway, also known as overhead line equipment. These poles support the overhead wires that supply electric power to trains. In our case, since we're setting up a freight yard where trains will be parked, sorted, and assembled rather than actively running long routes, the overhead electrification isn't necessary. And we also need an engine house, or what many call a train depot, a building for maintaining and repairing locomotives and rail cars. My plan for this depot is to be dedicated to passenger trains, and this building may include repair shops, fueling stations, and equipment storage. And this large building is actually the default train yard structure from the game. Not sure if this is vanilla or from a mod, but you can tell just by looking at it that the scale is way too small. But it's perfect to place it here as the depot for freight cars. Aside from that, a basic yard also typically needs control towers, offices where yard workers coordinate train movements and oversee operations. Some freight yards may even have warehouse-like facilities for additional storage and logistics. And of course, we'll be building each of those elements one by one as we go along. But before any of that, let's connect the tracks first. Compared to the previous episodes, this rail yard we're building is indeed quite large. The highway interchange from the very first episode doesn't even cover a quarter of this yard's size. Most train yards use a layer of crushed stone, known as ballast, under and around the tracks. And that's exactly what we're working on right now. It's a lot of work, and if you'd like to support, drop a like, subscribe, or even join my membership plan. Anyway, this gravel provides essential stability, assists with drainage, and plays a key role in controlling vegetation. Without it, large weeds and shrubs can grow around the tracks, making the ground uneven and risking derailments. Overgrown plants also block visibility, making it hard for workers to see track conditions or switches. Plus, dry or dead vegetation also poses a fire hazard, especially in areas where sparks from welding, braking, or engine exhaust. The reason we're digging into all these seemingly unimportant details is because we're going in the opposite direction of a normal, functioning train yard, which set in a post-apocalyptic world. Some train yards do have warehouses, especially large freight yards, and those warehouses are typically used to store goods temporarily, handle cargo transfers, or house equipment and supplies needed for yard operations. And that's what we are doing right now, working on building this kind of warehouses for the yard. And there's one random guy claiming that the survivors from the trailer park in the last episode made their way over to this nearby train yard. Apparently, it wasn't just a random decision. They had 5 main reasons. Number 1, there's a small creek in the area that hasn't been contaminated by radiation yet. Although we haven't added a water source like that just yet, we'll set one up later to fit this idea for sure. After all, water is the number 1 essential for survival, and without a stable and safe water source, the rest is just a joke. And number 2, there are lots of supplies in the train cars and semi-trucks dropping off and picking stuff up there like food, medical supplies, or vehicles, and that's exactly what we're setting up now and what we'll be working on shortly. And number 3, there's already a barbed wire fence surrounding the yard to keep thieves out. So they repurposed it to keep the zombies out, as well as making a barricade of trucks, cars, and other vehicles and items to keep the government or zombies out. Number 4, they could use the train cars as housing or businesses and move them around with a locomotive if necessary to maybe make some makeshift streets. This instantly got me into the game. Metro. I mean, if there's anything cooler than an apocalyptic road trip, it's got to be a road trip with a train as the home base, right? I remember Assassin's Creed Syndicate also had a train as the main base. And yeah, I really miss the days when games were just games. You know, without all those woke nonsense everywhere feels scarier than an actual apocalypse, to be honest. And reason number 5, this rail yard, it's on the other side of the highway, so there's less radiation and also less zombies. We all know that's very true. Highways can block radiation, just like good things always happen to good people. Big thanks to that one random guy for inspiring this story, and of course to all of you who have shared ideas and inspiration. You know, this whole series is built on your suggestions, and I'm constantly gathering those stories. Don't worry if your story ties back to earlier episodes, because I'm planning a special story recap episode that goes all the way back to our very beginning. I've got a fantastic sad motel story lined up. It's not about the owner, but it nails the atmosphere perfectly. There's also a whole collection of rumors circulating about the mayor that I might reveal after I gather a bit more info. Plus, we've got plenty of theories and analyses spreading around the crash site of that airplane, which might even connect back to our Patient Zero. Speaking of Patient Zero, we got more whistleblowers and sources come forward, each claiming to know the real story, even the origin of the virus. But I would say this is still early, and we'll need to verify all this before jumping to conclusions. And of course, we can't forget our infamous The Truth media. This so-called Sofia Laguber, probably hiding out somewhere in a safe house, I guess, stirring things up on social media. And let's check out their latest post. Quote, "This just further exemplifies my point. Not only did the government cause a chemical leak to cover up the power plant disaster, I'm certain they shot down that plane too. They didn't want anyone even so high up over the city to see what happened. Do they take us for fools? What were they hiding in there? Search the truth, and of course don't trust the government." Meanwhile, the police have also noticed that some citizens are actually starting to follow behind this so-called truth media. Kebi Ben posted, "My best friend moved there last year and has been messaging me about the situation. Don't believe the government's lies. The president said the population was evacuated after the explosion, but that's untrue. It's an absolute travesty how the evacuation of the city went. There have to be at least hundreds of people left, including my friend. They're huddled together at a police checkpoint, receiving meager rations, while the checkpoint supervisor lives like a king and makes the survivors build walls around the camp." I gotta say, it is a good story, a classic story of a tyrant, but honestly, I'm not buying it. I mean, I admire their courage, but smearing the authorities is a serious crime. Can you really trust the words of those criminals? I don't think so. And let me also remind all citizens out there, the internet isn't beyond the law and the big boss is watching you. And remember folks, every keystroke you make, every click you take, the big boss sees it all. You think this so-called truth media is safe? Think again. As we speak, Homeland Security is already knocking on his door. So let this be a lesson. Keep your heads down, stay in line, and remember who's really in charge. The world may be falling apart, but the order stays strong and playing its part. Keep scrolling, keep calm, and remember, we will keep watching. So now, this tanker area is wrapping up. This yard is equipped with specialized facilities for loading liquid cargo, making it a transfer hub for fuel transport. And I'm also using this area to test how much detail we actually need. It's basically a test zone. And once this is set, we'll start lining up more freight cars throughout the yard. Before we get to that, let me add more weeds around the area. After all, it's been abandoned for a while. If you ask me, there's nothing quite as satisfying as lining up trains on the tracks. This rail yard is just like a school, whether it's elementary, high school, college, or even Hogwarts. Think of the trains as students, and they are sorted into different grades. Each track represents a grade level here, and every year there are new students, or in this case, new wagons arriving on the scene. Kind of like the sorting hat in Harry Potter, placing students in different houses. In a rail yard, the process is quite similar. Whether it's open wagons full of coal or container cars loaded with goods, each type of car gets sorted onto a track according to its destination. And then once they're all sorted, the locomotive acts as the head teacher, pulling each class off to wherever they're meant to go. Since the variety of wagons in the game is pretty limited, I'm relying on color adjustments here to add some diversity to the freight cars. Honestly, when it comes to trains, Transport Fever 2 is probably the best out there. You know, hundreds of different cars and each with unique paint schemes, engines and wagons from different decades, and you can even make them look brand new or give them a more aged look. I was completely hooked on it for ages. You know, it's one of those things that's just so easy to get lost in. But of course, transport fever doesn't quite measure up when it comes to buildings and other assets. Placing buildings can be a real hassle and the mods feel pretty limited, and I've often imagined how incredible it would be if transport fever and city skylines could somehow combine. Until then, I guess we'll have to making the best of what each has to offer. We're at the point where I need to build some of the container freight cars manually, and it is so strange that the game doesn't come with any pre-built container trains. So I'm using Move It and these 20-foot containers to make it work. And look at these colors. Whoever came up with this default color scheme is a fucking genius. I mean, this train just looks like it's made of one giant magnet after another. I simply cannot accept it, so I'm going to spend some more time here tweaking these colors. And after that, of course, we need more container cars, maybe even some double-stacked ones. They could hold all sorts of cargo. Imagine some filled with non-perishable food, the number one thing you will need. Like canned soups, beans, vegetables, and fruits. Those kinds of things you'd usually pass by in the supermarket without a second thought are now incredibly valuable commodities. Being picky about food, that's just not an option anymore. And maybe if you are lucky, you can find boxes of dried goods like rice, pasta. They're not as convenient to eat since they need cooking. You'll need a kitchen, or at least a fire, plus some pots and pans to make it work, but they're probably the most useful items out there. From a scientific standpoint, rice and pasta often could offer more than just calories. They also contain small amounts of protein and essential micronutrients like magnesium, phosphorus, and B vitamins, particularly in whole grain varieties like brown rice. These grains make a great base that can be paired with a variety of other foods, allowing for diverse meals even in restricted circumstances. Additionally, they're compact and lightweight, which is practical for transport and storage, whether for individual stockpiling or mass distribution in emergencies. There might be medical supplies too, though finding them requires more than just luck. You'll need some basic knowledge. You have to at least recognize which is which and what is what. Take me for instance, I know what to do with bandages and I know what NyQuil is, but give me anything more advanced and I would know the first thing about using it. But if you have a medical background, I strongly suggest that you should first look for places where medical supplies are likely to be found when chaos strikes. I'm not saying you should just go and loot those supplies, but in chaotic times, it's far better for valuable medicines to end up with someone who knows how to use them than to be wasted by some idiot. Plus, if you know which meds are truly useful, you could save more lives. Or you could simply trade those precious meds for other essential goods. Now that we've got the container cars pretty much set up, it's time to start adding some interesting little detailed scenes. Just like this loading area we're building now, most of these boxes are probably filled with stuff that's not exactly useful, or at least anything valuable has already been picked clean, taken by the first scavengers who came through, leaving behind only the things that aren't so important anymore. The ground is littered with discarded packaging, broken items, and those useless goods nobody wanted. There might be shipments of electronics, TVs, laptops, smartphones, maybe boxes of luxury items like designer clothes, high-heeled shoes, or fancy handbags. And there could be toys, games, sports equipment, or holiday decorations like Christmas ornaments and Halloween costumes. And none of those are important no more. It's all been reclaimed by nature now. Weeds have taken over, pushing through the cracks and wrapping themselves around the abandoned cargo. On On the other side of the warehouse, there's a track with an old metro train parked on it. It could be a retired passenger car left here to gather dust. The back of the warehouse also has some faded, weathered graffiti from years past. This spot actually looks like it'd make a pretty good hideout, but for now, we're not going to do too much with it. A lumber freight train is typically made up of flat cars stacked with logs or bundled lumber. These cars often have side stakes or tie downs to keep the wood stable during transit. Judging by the way these logs are scattered everywhere, it seems this area has already been looted, which means a survivor camp might be close by. The timber could be used to reinforce shelters, adding an extra layer of protection against the potential threats. Firewood would be essential for fueling stoves, heating systems, and even for purifying water by boiling it. In a world without easy access to modern materials, these lumber cars would serve as critical resource collection spots, making them key areas to secure. And next to these lumber cars is another set of warehouses and a control tower. In the past, this control tower has been used to oversee train movements, manage track switching, and coordinate the flow of cargo in and out of the yard. Operators would monitor incoming and outgoing trains from above, ensuring smooth and safe operations across the site. If these survivors are smart enough, they'd make this tower the central hub of their camp. And right over here are another 2 rows of tanker cars. Who knows what they're filled with. I mean, some of them could be empty, but what if there's usable fuel in there? That would be a game changer. The survivors then could power up generators and even fuel vehicles. But there's also a risk. Some of these tankers might be carrying dangerous materials or chemicals. One wrong move and they could be fucked up really bad. It's time to work on this passenger cars area. This yard isn't just a dedicated freight yard, it also serves as a maintenance hub for both locomotives and passenger cars. This even makes it perfect for a survivor base. With the nearby warehouses and all the resource freight cars and these passenger coaches next door as living quarters or even a command center, survivors could have everything they need easily. These cars are already set up for people to sit or even sleep, offering an enclosed, weather-protected space that's relatively secure and easy to defend. The only catch is that these passenger cars were pulled by electric engines, and there's no way the rail grid has power right now. So if they're planning to drive these trains to escape, they'll need a skilled mechanic to fix up these 2 diesel locomotives here, and with that, the escaping could actually be possible. But of course, that is easier said than done. The diesel engines have been sitting unused for God knows how long, and who knows what kind of damage or parts they might need. And even if they get the engines running, they'll have to gather enough fuel, not to mention map out a safe route through areas that could be blocked or dangerous. It's risky for sure, but in a situation like this, any chance is better than no chance. I think that wraps it up for this episode. There's still a lot left to finish, like the derailed train and the traces of survivor activity we haven't managed to add yet, but we'll save those for next time. And thanks for watching. I am Donkey D. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and please drop any suggestions in the comments below. Until next time, take care.